One of the most common things women say when they reach a career crossroads is some version of this. I feel like I need to figure myself out. And underneath that, there's often another feeling: pressure. Pressure to reinvent, pressure to come up with a whole new plan, pressure to discover some completely different version of themselves, pressure to suddenly have a bold new answer about what the rest of her career life is supposed to look like. And I understand that feeling because when something no longer fits, it's natural to assume the answer must be to become someone entirely new. But I want to say something about that today that I think is deeply important. Most women at a career crossroads are not being asked to invent themselves from scratch. They are being asked to reconnect. Reconnect with what has been true in them for a long time. Reconnect with the parts of themselves that have gotten buried beneath performance, pressure, roles, expectations, and momentum. That's a very different thing from reinvention. Reinvention can sound exciting, but it can also become another performance. Reconnection is different. It's quieter, deeper, more honest. It's less about becoming impressive and more about becoming true. And that's what we're going to talk about today: why a career crossroads is not usually a demand for reinvention, why it is more often an invitation back to yourself, and why that may be one of the most relieving truths a woman can hear when she feels uncertain about what comes next. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and listening into the podcast. I appreciate you. I say it all the time. I will continue to say it. I really do appreciate you because without you, there is no podcast. And without you, we would not have been ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And as you may know, this is a space where we talk about leadership, purpose, identity, and the deeper questions thoughtful women encounter as their careers evolve. And over the last several episodes, we've been building on a deeper understanding of what happens when an accomplished woman, a successful woman, reaches a career crossroads. We've talked about the questioning itself, the pattern beneath it, why achievement does not always bring clarity, why strategy alone often fails, and why the inner signs women feel are often meaningful information and not weaknesses. And today, I want to move into a deeper identity conversation because once a woman begins to notice the signs and take them seriously, the next question is often this: so now what? Who am I now? And very often that question comes with a lot of pressure: pressure to reinvent, pressure to create an entirely different version of life, pressure to come up with a brand new self definition. But I want to offer a different frame. At a career crossroads, the work is often not invention or reinvention. It is remembrance. It is reconnection. It is returning to the parts of yourself that you have always carried as true, even if you've not been living closely connected to them lately. That's what we're going to explore in today's episode. Okay, so now I want to talk about why reinvention is so tempting. I think reinvention is tempting for a few reasons. First, it gives the feeling of movement. And when a woman feels uncertain, reinvention sounds decisive. It sounds like an action. It sounds like a way out of discomfort. Second, reinvention sounds culturally impressive. We live in a world that loves dramatic transformation stories: the pivot, the leap, the brand new chapter. And while those stories can be inspiring, they can also create a lot of pressure because many women begin to think that if they do not have a dramatic reinvention story, then maybe they're not changing in the right way. And third, reinvention can feel emotionally safer than reconnection, because reconnection asks a woman to get honest, honest about what she's been overriding, what she's been tolerating, about the distance between the career life she is experiencing and the self she most deeply is. And that's valuable work. Reinvention can let a woman skip that vulnerability by jumping straight into a shiny new plan. But if the deeper issue is disconnection from self, then a new plan alone will not solve it. You can reinvent externally and still feel internally unfamiliar with yourself. Because at a career crossroads, the deepest question is often not, how do I become someone else? It is, how do I come back to myself? All right, now let's talk about what gets lost along the way. Many women do not lose themselves all at once. It happens gradually through adaptation, responsibility, achievement, through saying yes to what makes sense, through learning how to function in systems that reward performance more than truth. None of that means a woman has done something wrong. Often it means she has done what was required to build a life, sustain a career, lead, provide, contribute, and survive demanding seasons with grace. But somewhere along the way, adapting can become over adapting. A woman becomes so good at meeting the moment that she loses track of what is mostly deeply her. She knows how to perform the role, produce the result, and how to be a version of herself that works. But she becomes less connected to the version of herself that feels most alive, most rooted, and most true. That is often what a career crossroads begins exposing. Not just dissatisfaction with the job, but distance from self. Because once a woman senses that she's no longer fully living from her deepest center, the issue is no longer only career. Now the issue is truth. All right, so I want to talk about now that you are not a blank page. And this is one of the most relieving things I want women to understand. At a career crossroads, you are not a blank page. You're not empty. You're not starting with nothing. You are not required to invent an identity out of thin air. There's already truth in you. There are already patterns in your career life. There are already things that have consistently mattered. There are already ways to come alive, already values that feel deeply significant, already strengths that come naturally, and already moments in your life when the truest version of you has been visible. And that matters because when women feel disconnected, they often assume that they have to construct themselves from scratch. But often the deeper work is not construction, it's recognition. Recognition of what has been there, recognition of what has stayed true beneath the noise, recognition of what keeps resurfacing, even when you try to explain it away. That is why I don't think the deepest work at a career crossroads is becoming someone new. I think it is recovering contact with what has always been most true. All right, so now let's talk about the difference between reinvention and reconnection. And let me make this distinction clear here. Reinvention often asks, what new version of me can I create? On the other hand, reconnection asks, what true version of me have I drifted away from? Reinvention often focuses on image, role, or external change, while reconnection focuses on essence. Reinvention can be driven by urgency, fear, or the pressure to quickly produce a new answer. Reconnection, on the other hand, is more grounded. It asks for honesty before performance, truth before image, identity before strategy. Reinvention can become another way of performing. Reconnection, on the other hand, invites a woman to stop performing long enough to hear herself more clearly. And that is why reconnection is often harder, but it's also more powerful. Because when a woman reconnects with herself, the decisions that follow are less likely to feel borrowed or performative. They're more likely to come from who she really is. And that difference changes everything. All right, so now let's talk about what reconnection often feels like. One reason women don't always trust reconnection is because it does not always feel dramatic at first. It often begins with recognition, with memory, with a thought like, I used to feel alive when, or that part of me has been quiet for a long time, or I've always cared deeply about fill in the blank. Reconnection often begins not with a lightning bolt, but with just honest noticing, an honest noticing of what has stayed true. And sometimes that can feel both beautiful and painful. Beautiful because it feels like coming home to something real. Painful because it can also highlight how far away you have felt from that part of yourself. That's why women sometimes avoid reconnection because reconnecting with your truth can also make it harder to keep tolerating what no longer fits. But that's also what makes it so valuable because once you reconnect with what is most true, you're less easily seduced by options that only look good on paper. You become more able to discern, more able to hear yourself, more able to choose, decide from a deeper center. The truest self is usually revealed, not manufactured. I sometimes think women at a career crossroad feel pressured to come up with a brilliant new answer to their career life, when in reality, life may be asking them to notice what it has already been showing them. Not in one perfect clue, but in patterns, reoccurring themes, in what has consistently energized them, what has consistently mattered, in what has repeatedly drawn them, in what has felt deeply meaningful across different seasons of life. And that's why I often say the truest self is usually revealed, not manufactured. It becomes visible in patterns, in the signals, in the reoccurring truths, in the moments when you felt most fully yourself. And this doesn't mean your life should look the same forever. It does mean there's often a thread, a through line, a deeper selfhood that remains recognizable across time. And when a woman reconnects the thread, she stops feeling like she has to invent or reinvent a future from nothing. Now she's building from something real. In my own work, I often use the phrase true purpose self. And when I say that, I'm not talking about some polished, perfect version of you. I'm talking about the deepest, truest part of who you are. The part of you that has always carried clues about what matters to you, what energizes you, how you're naturally wired, and how you are meant to contribute. That self may get covered over, may get ignored, it may get crowded out by pressure, performance, fear, achievement, or survival. But she does not disappear. And that matters because many women at a career crossroads are not empty. They're not empty, they are estranged, estranged from parts of themselves that have always been there. And that is a painful distinction, but also a hopeful one. Because if the issue is estrangement, then the path forward is not self invention from scratch, it is relationship. Relationship with self, listening again, remembering again, trusting again. All right, so now let's talk about signs you may need reconnection more than reinvention. So, signs you may need reconnection more than reinvention. And sometimes it just helps to name this clearly. You may need reconnection more than reinvention if you keep thinking you need a dramatic new answer, but what you really feel is deep internal distance. You're exhausted by the pressure to figure yourself out. You notice that certain parts of yourself keep resurfacing, no matter how much you focus on external options. You feel like your deepest need is not to become more impressive, but to feel more like yourself again. Because many women at a career crossroads do not actually want reinvention. They want relief from disconnection. They want to feel rooted again. They want to trust themselves again. They want to make decisions that feel like they belong to their real life, not just their resume. And that longing is important. It points to a deeper work. And here's my own reflection on this. When I reflect on my career life, one of the things I understand more clearly now is that the deepest turning points were not always about becoming someone completely new. They were about recognizing what had been true in me and letting that truth matter more, letting it guide more, letting it interrupt paths that looked fine on paper, but no longer felt fully true. And this is one of the things I want women to hear in this conversation. You do not have to invent or reinvent your life from scratch every time you reach a career crossroads. Sometimes your next chapter becomes clearer because you finally listen to the self who had been trying to get your attention for a long time. That is quieter than reinvention, but it's stronger because it's built on truth. Okay, so now here is what to ask instead of who should I become? So if reinvention is not the right first question, what is? Instead of asking, who should I become? Try asking, what has always felt deeply true in me? When have I felt most like myself? What really matters in a way that has stayed consistent across time? And those questions do not force a quick answer, but they do something better. They begin reestablishing contact with the truth. And once that happens, strategy becomes more useful because now it has something real to serve. All right, so now here's a gentle word to the woman who feels lost. If you're listening to this and thinking, I don't know who I am anymore, then I want to say this to you. Lost does not always mean empty. Sometimes lost means disconnected. And disconnected is different. Disconnected means there is still something to reconnect with. There's still truth in you. There's still a pattern in you. There's still life in you. And there's still a self worth returning to. So, if this season has made you feel like you have to reinvent everything, maybe begin with a softer question. What if I do not need to become someone else? What if I need to come back to myself? That question can change the whole emotional tone of a career crossroads. It turns the season from performance problem into a truth process. All right, so now before we close, I want to leave you with a few questions. Here they are. Have you been putting pressure on yourself to reinvent when what you really need is reconnection? What parts of you have been quiet, but not gone? Where in your life have you felt most like yourself? And what would change if I stopped treating this season like a demand to become someone new and just start treating it like an invitation to come back to what is most true? Sometimes the next chapter begins not with reinvention, but remembering. In the next episode, we're going to make this even more practical. Because often, once a woman begins to understand that she's being invited back to herself, the next question becomes, how do I actually find the clues? So, in the next episode, we're going to talk about the earlier moments in your life that may hold powerful identity clues and why your story may contain more guidance than you realize. So, if you're at a career crossroads, I'm going to leave you with this. You are not a blank page. You are not starting from nothing. And you do not have to invent a truer self from scratch. There's already truth in you, already pattern in you, already a deeper self-worth listening to. This season may not be asking you to perform a reinvention. It may be asking you just to come back to yourself. So, as I said in the beginning, I appreciate you for listening. And if this conversation has resonated with you, be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss the next episode in this series. And I can't wait to see you in the next episode. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.